The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the seventh month dies, and the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not, and either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. Okay, this seems like your standard sort of prophecy where forces outside of the control of others point in a direction for a vague answer for who could be the chosen one to save the day. But the thing about prophecies and Harry Potter is they're not always true. Like divination as a whole, it's not always accurate, which there's a certain irony in that fact when you consider that it's looking into the future, and when we do look at time travel in Harry Potter, it's with time turners where you can only travel to the past, but it's also certain because you traveled to the past to make sure things happened that have had already happened because you will have had always gone back in time to make sure those things happen.
Oh no, I've gone cross-eyed.
But when looking at divination as seen into the future, it's the opposite. None of it's guaranteed. It's chaotic even in some ways. I mean, we know Trelawney is a seer, but she also has a reputation as a fraud. I mean, she doesn't even know how good she is really. She doesn't remember making that first prophecy, and she doesn't remember making the prophecy about Voldemort returning either in Prisoner of Azkaban. Heck, even we don't know how good of a seer she is on a first read through, and not just the big things either. I mean, the dumb little blink and you miss it moments, like how she tells Parvati to beware a red haired man, and she thinks it's Ron, but then it ends up being Padma having a bad time with Ron at the Yule Ball the next year, or how she predicts the day that the thing Lavender is dreading will happen. Lavender then thinks that it's her pet bunny Binky dying, but then later that chapter Sirius breaks into the castle. Also, not related, but why isn't Lavender allowed to have Binky at Hogwarts? I know the letters the students get every year say they're allowed to have a cat, an owl, or a toad, but Ron's allowed to have a rat, and even if you want to say, well, the rat ended up being an animagus, and that's what the rule is supposed to prevent, McGonagall is an animagus too, and her form is a cat, so that doesn't really work. And even then, there's a lot of rules surrounding animagi with the Ministry of Magic, and even if you want to say, well, heck, the Marauders broke all those rules while at Hogwarts, one, it's not like Dumbledore knew about it, and two, he wouldn't allow it if he did. I just think it would be nice for Lavender to have had her pet. I mean, unless the explanation is just that she follows the rules and all of the Weasleys break the rules instead of just Gret and Forge. Man, I did not realize I had this much to say about a side character's once mentioned pet.
Thank you for your time.
But back to divination. Trelawney does show us that it's real, even if she can't explain just how real it is, so maybe if we look to another group that shows the ability to see the stars, the centaurs, maybe they would have a better grasp on it, but even when Ferenzi is teaching the students as Trelawney's substitute, he's not definite about anything. And this isn't just Ferenzi protecting the Centaur's secrets from wizards, it's just kind of how their divination works. Even when we're first introduced to him and Hagrid's asking him if he's seen anything in the forest as they're searching for the dying unicorn, Ferenzi just goes, "Mars is bright tonight," and they just keep going on their way looking for it because they don't care about the stars. But then they meet Ronan again, and this is where I hope the TV show just lets Nick Frost basically jim the camera, where Ronan 2 goes, "Mars is bright tonight," and then Nick Frost can just look dead into the camera and go, "We heard. Thanks." But this is a very important prediction because Mars being bright signals that the peace that wizards are having is just temporary, that they are at a temporary peace between wars. But here's the problem with that. By the very nature of humans, if we are not at war, then we're between wars. And even if you want to say this is specifically talking about Voldemort's war, I would argue that Voldemort's war really starts in 1942 with him opening the Chamber of Secrets. And yes, he is stopped at the end of 43, Hagrid is framed for murder, and for now the war is stopped because Voldemort has to be more cautious, because Dumbledore is keeping a closer eye on him, but the thing about that is, Mars would then be bright while the wizarding world is still fighting war against Grindelwald. So even the centaurs really don't have that firm, concrete grasp on divination that they may claim they do. So if we were to look on the magical expert, who I would argue is Dumbledore, and he definitely has a lot of experience with divination, between his experiences with Trelawney, his good relations with the centaurs, the predictions of Tycho Dodonus, and Grindelwald's own ability to see the future. He's probably had more experience with divination than any other non-seeing wizard, but even he knows that it's still an inexact brand of magic. If Voldemort had never heard of the prophecy, would it have been fulfilled? Would it have meant anything? Of course not. Do you think every prophecy in the Hall of Prophecy has been fulfilled? And Dumbledore brings up an interesting point, because we know there are a lot of prophecies in the Hall of Prophecies. And with how little we know about the Department of Mysteries, I think we have to ask how these prophecies are recorded. Because we know it's not the seers who are recording this, because they kind of go into a trance when they make these bigger predictions and have no memory of it after the fact. And that would leave it to be the people who hear these prophecies, but then you gotta ask, why would Dumbledore leave a trail for the prophecy? He's very secretive of it. He only tells it to Harry, who only tells Ron and Hermione, so why would he leave a physical trail somewhere to the prophecy where Voldemort can find it and be one of only 2 people who'd be able to recover it? The answer is he wouldn't. Of course he wouldn't. Why would he leave a trail for Voldemort? That's idiotic. So it has to be the room itself that is doing it, and this is where it kind of reminds me of a few other magical objects where you have, like, the Room of Requirement, the Book of Admittance, and the Quill of Acceptance all rolled together into one room to record these prophecies, because you would need it to have a wide enough range to be able to almost like sense when a seer is making a bigger prediction, or possibly even any prediction. It would be funny if there's a little prophecy orb in there of Neville breaking a teacup. That would actually be hilarious now that I think about it. But my point being that you have this wide range, and then the room itself then records and creates these orbs as the prophecies. In a way, it kind of reminds me of Inside Out.
That's long-term memory, an endless warren of corridors and shelves.
And I do think that the Ministry would have an interest in protecting who has the knowledge of these prophecies. And when I say the Ministry, I don't mean like as run by Fudge or Scrimgeour or Thickness. I mean in a more general sense. It's kind of like how Dumbledore is protecting the prophecy. Because he knows that it's not a good thing if everyone knows that Harry is the chosen one. Because people can't keep secrets. It will get back to Voldemort, which, depending on the time that it does, could mean nothing or everything. Which is kind of a theme with these prophecies. They predict very important things if things happen the right way. When Trelawney predicts that servant and master will be reunited, Harry's obviously very concerned and wants to prevent that, but his love for Hagrid overrules it, so he goes down to Hagrid's hut and then creates the events for Wormtail to have to find Voldemort. And the prediction of Tycho Dodonus doesn't matter because Leta Lestrange switched the babies, leading to Corvus Lestrange's death. I mean, Return Great Avenger with Wings from the Water does kind of point to Corvus being a Dumbledore, and Dumbledore's turning into phoenixes after they die, but as far as Fantastic Beasts goes, this is a prophecy that's probably not true and doesn't really matter except for the obsession that it creates in a few characters. Which, from a storytelling perspective, is a problem for the Fantastic Beasts movies, and it's why people were kind of frustrated with that little twist at the end for it, because it felt out of nowhere, but, I do think it's still true to Harry Potter, because it kind of gives us another piece of evidence of what Dumbledore already tells us, that not all the prophecies in the Hall of Prophecies come true, so I do think it's still true to Harry Potter, even though I understand the frustration, and do think it's a problem for storytelling perspective, but for us today trying to figure out how prophecies do work, it does serve as another piece of evidence proving Dumbledore right. Because even in the main Harry Potter story, what happens if Snape doesn't hear the prophecy and tell it to Voldemort? Or what happens if he hears the whole thing? That feels like it would be its own video, and if this video hits 10 likes, I'll definitely make that. But either way, this does change the story a lot, because if Snape doesn't hear the prophecy, then Voldemort doesn't attack Harry as a baby. And if he overhears the full thing, well, maybe Voldemort waits to attack. I mean, I think there's a certain amount of truth in the prophecies, and there's a lot of different ways it could happen, but that's because it's vague. But just because it's vague and there are a few different ways it could play out, doesn't mean that it's guaranteed to happen or guaranteed not to happen. Because free will still matters. Because Voldemort fears death above all else, so as soon as he hears the prophecy, of course he's going to attack Harry as a baby. That's what makes the prophecy true. And because Voldemort will never stop attacking Harry, then one will have to finish off the other. You know, Harry is going to try to do it because that's what's right and because he wants to protect everyone, but at a certain point, he's almost doing it out of self-defense. But this only happens because of the choices that Dumbledore, Snape, and Voldemort all make. Snape chooses to tell Voldemort the prophecy when he knows there could be a risk to Lily's life, and then he chooses to ask Voldemort to spare her life. Voldemort chooses to go after the Potters instead of the Longbottoms, and he chooses to grant Snape's wish. He does not have to. And Dumbledore chooses to not try to spend his life finishing off Voldemort himself anymore. He believes that he is the mentor now and is spending the rest of his life training the Chosen One. That is a lot of choices for something that is destined to happen. And yes, of course, there's more than one outcome where Voldemort could fall, but there's also a lot of outcomes where he could win. The prophecy speaks of one with the ability to defeat the Dark Lord. Neither can live while the other survives. It does not say that Voldemort will definitely fall. It even seems like whatever forces lead seers to go into these trances chose Trelawney at this specific moment because both Dumbledore and Snape would be there to hear it. You know, like it's choosing Dumbledore as the perfect one to train the Chosen One, and it's choosing Snape because of his love for Lily that will lead to him asking Voldemort to spare her, and that he's important enough to Voldemort that he will get that wish granted. And this wouldn't be the only time where Trelawney makes a prediction that is specifically being given to one person, because again, Master and Servant being reunited is being given to Harry. And yes, either way, I think he's going to be down at Hagrid's hut that night, but it's almost kind of just like a little forewarning, almost, to say like, hey, if events go the way that you want them to tonight, then Master and Servant will be reunited, and you will have to fight Voldemort a lot sooner than you expect. But 2 can be a coincidence. 3 is a magic number, and the third example we have of it is actually with the Centaurs, as we have Bane getting frustrated with Firenze because he interferes in Harry's first year by saving him from Voldemort in the Forbidden Forest. As Bane predicts that the end of the war will come in the Forbidden Forest, and that Harry, Voldemort, and Hagrid will be involved. And where this gets really cool is that Firenze tells us that centaurs can be off by years because the stars don't give them exact dates. So, what happens 6 years later? Harry goes back into the Forbidden Forest to die at Voldemort's hand, only to come back and be carried back to Hogwarts by Hagrid, leading to the final confrontation between Voldemort and Harry, Voldemort's demise, the end of the war, and the prophecy of the Chosen One being fulfilled, even if Harry wasn't always the one.
But I am the Chosen One.
So if I had to sum up prophecies in Harry Potter, I'd start by saying they are by no means guaranteed, and it makes me think of 2 quotes from 2 much wiser beings than me, with always in motion the future is, and one often meets his destiny on the path he takes to avoid it. You know, it's different from time travel in Harry Potter because time turners deal with what's certain, while divination at its core is so uncertain. That's why so many wizards think it's nonsense. There can be multiple ways that a prophecy can be fulfilled, or no way at all. It all depends on who's involved, and that's what I think makes Harry Potter prophecies so unique and special, because so often they feel predestined, like it's fated to happen in stories, but in Harry Potter, free will matters. It decides things, and that's why it's my favorite example of prophecies and stories. But now I want to hear from you guys. What do you think of prophecies in Harry Potter? Is there anything I left out here? Just drop a comment down below. I'd love to hear what you think. But that's all I got for you guys today. So if you enjoyed, drop a like, subscribe if you want more like this, and I'll see you next time on STV.